The Canon PowerShot V1 is marketed as a powerful content creation camera. But as many of you have said, smartphones nowadays should be making camera companies a little bit nervous. So let's see if that's true. I used both of these cameras as a content creator would to see which one fared better when it came to video and photography. Out of the gate, take a look at this blind test and see if you can tell which camera got which shot. I threw both cameras up into an overhead configuration, and I happen to think the skin tones look better on camera A, mainly because they look a little bit more realistic to me. Now, I think this interior headshot example, which is the same exact setup as my talking headshots that I do for YouTube, gives it away a little bit more because, as you can see, skin tones on camera B look a little bit less realistic. I also shot with both of these cameras in their log profiles to see what the images look like in their log format, and then how they looked after I did a little bit of color grading with each of them. Can you tell which one is which? Lens flares are also a very important deciding factor for a lot of people who are choosing which camera they should buy. I personally like camera A's explosion of light a lot better, and I was exposing both cameras the exact same way. For this green screen shot, I actually think camera B did a little bit better because it retained a lot more realistic looking colors on this older camera compared to the more saturated look you get with camera A. It's all of these different types of tests that I like to do to see which one holds up better when it comes to image quality. Now here's the results of the shots. Let me know which one you liked better and why. This one was pretty easy for me because I noticed when I'm in an interior studio lit environment, the skin tones on the iPhone 16 Pro tend to have a smoothing effect on them. And the Canon PowerShot V1, which does have a larger sensor, is able to handle this environment a lot better and produce realer to life looking skin tones. And although this overhead product shot with the iPhone doesn't look too bad, I can still almost see that beauty effect done in camera with the iPhone, which I wish I could turn off. And I found the same thing here with this talking headshot where my skin tones look a lot more realistic with the PowerShot V1 compared to the iPhone 16 Pro. Skin tones on Canon cameras have always looked great to me. In my opinion, I see a little bit of facial distortion, but that's only due to the focal length that I was using for this particular shot. And just to show you what the iPhone does with skin tones one more time, you get like a beauty effect or a smooth effect that makes the skin tones look a little bit more plastic or unrealistic. So in this case, the PowerShot V1 definitely wins. Also, this video is not sponsored by Canon or by Apple. In fact, this video is not being sponsored at all. If you'd like to support the channel, then you can purchase my film look LUTs that I made for the iPhone. I'll leave a link to those LUTs in the description. Now, if I was to use log profiles, I would probably end up using the iPhone 16 Pro because it's Apple log and it holds a lot more information, which is good for color grading once I get to post-production. I was exposing for the sky in this shot, and the PowerShot V1 did pretty good, but I see a lot of noise not only in the sky, but also in the shadows. The iPhone does a lot better of a job retaining all of that information so that I can color grade it in post-production and really bring all of those colors back. Now, if you'd like to use any of this footage to either grade it or see how they perform on your editing rigs, I've created a free project file pack for you to download. It's basically just shots that I got with both of these cameras. That way you don't have to go out and buy these cameras and then test out how they work in your editing rigs. You can just download them and try them out. I just ask for you to join the Film Alliance by subscribing. I'll leave a link to that project file pack in the description. One of the ways that I can always tell the difference between a dedicated camera and a smartphone is how the lens flare looks, especially when we're looking at a golden hour sun. A dedicated camera and lens will typically produce better controlled lens flares because of its larger optics and its fixed focal design, which helps scatter the light more effectively. The iPhone's smaller lens and form factor make it more prone to unwanted lens flares, or maybe not as explosive of a lens flare that you get with a dedicated camera. I also noticed with the other comparison videos that I've done in the past that when I'm doing green screen work like this one, the PowerShot V1 seems to oversaturate the image. And it's not really noticeable on the subject itself until you remove the green screen, and then you can see that there's a lot more saturation on the subject. Whereas in this case with the iPhone, it did a lot better. And I'm not sure why this is because I was using the standard color profile and not Apple log. But that's when I was in a controlled lighting environment. Once I stepped out into that lighting environment where everything was very well lit, I didn't see too much of a difference. The PowerShot V1 has a little bit more saturation in the ground and in the foliage, which is surprising to me because I thought the iPhone oversaturates everything. But in this case, the iPhone did a better job keeping more of a neutral look and giving me the ability to add a little bit of saturation if I wanted to in post-production rather than taking it down. When I shoot with both cameras in their wide angle lenses, I noticed a big shift in their color science. The PowerShot V1 has a much darker green compared to the light, almost yellowish green we get with the iPhone. I did notice, however, when I did this exposure transition test, the iPhone does a lot better in exposing quicker, but the Canon PowerShot V1 does a lot better when it comes to skin tones. I think this is a particularly useful test because if you're vlogging, you're gonna be going in and out of the sun and shadows. So I would prefer the PowerShot V1 for skin tones, and I would just understand that when I have it in auto exposure, it's not going to expose that quickly. The iPhone 16 Pro, on the other hand, exposes a lot faster between the sun when it's hitting me in the face and then when I jump back into the shadow. It's just that the skin tones don't look too real. But if you were to shoot skin tones in a low light situation, then I would 100% go with the PowerShot V1 because look at how muddy the iPhone 16 Pro looks in this shot. The PowerShot V1 also looks pretty muddy, and I was shooting this shot at 4000 ISO, but it still retains a lot of detail in not only my face, but also the background. The iPhone, on the other hand, completely falls apart. And this is one of those scenarios where the Canon is a lot better than an iPhone if you're shooting skin tones in low light. And check out this backlighting shot. If you look at the leaves, you can see that the PowerShot V1 seems to have a lot more detail in the shadows. However, it is only a slight difference. In this stabilization test, however, the iPhone does a lot better. The iPhone almost looks like I have it mounted up on a gimbal when I'm actually just going handheld with both cameras. In this test of the sky color, you can see that both cameras look very similar. However, the iPhone seems to be slightly more saturated than the PowerShot V1. The Canon does seem to be a little bit more saturated with the plants behind this fallen tree, and that's exactly what we were seeing with that 4K 24 shot of the foliage. The iPhone also lifts up those midtones in camera. You can't really turn that off, and it's very apparent when you're looking at the log. In this time-lapse shot, even though I had the Canon underexposed, it overexposed the sky and the trees that were in the distance. However, it has more detail in the water than the iPhone does, and the iPhone isn't overexposed, but it does have less detail than the PowerShot. I also decided to test out the audio outdoors with both of these cameras, and let me know which one of these two cameras' microphones you think sounded better. Here's the Canon PowerShot V1 out in the woods doing a vlog style type of shot here. And one thing that you don't want to have happen if you come in on a kayak is to see that it's unattached in the middle of the lake, because now it looks like I'm gonna have to take a dive. I'm just kidding, that's not my kayak. And here's my vlog test with the iPhone 16 Pro. Not only are we gonna look at skin tones, but we're also listening to that audio. We'll compare it back to the PowerShot V1. I wanna see which one has better audio. I know with the 16 Pro, they really updated their mics. So it's gonna be interesting to see if the Canon PowerShot V1 can hold up to Apple's native mics. And then I jumped into a car to listen how the microphone would react in an almost silent environment. Take a listen. Here's our Canon PowerShot V1 audio in the vehicle. This is gonna be the best sounding audio that you can get other than being in a soundproof studio. All right, here's our talking head type shot inside of a vehicle. Like I mentioned with the Canon PowerShot V1, this is gonna be the best audio test that we could possibly get. In this vlog shot, I wasn't very impressed with either camera. The PowerShot V1 overexposed the background, and the iPhone skin tones were mushy and dark. In this photography shot, I'm gonna have to give it to the iPhone. It has much more detail throughout the entire shot, and the color seems more realistic, but that has a lot to do with the computational photography that's going on within the iPhone. And take a look at this burning log. I don't see a lot of detail with the PowerShot, whereas you can actually see the lines on the log with the iPhone. And then we have this shot of the deer skull. There's a huge difference in the blur in the background and the detail and also the color science. I think that this one goes up for personal preference. I like the way the Canon looks better. For this photography shot of the lake, I don't think there's much of a difference. The iPhone is a little bit more saturated, but that's about it. In this 1080 120 shot, the Canon pulls through with detail in the smoke. By the way, the PowerShot V1 can shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second with a crop, and the iPhone 16 Pro can shoot in 4K up to 120 frames per second. So if you wanted to shoot in 4K 120 slow motion, go with the iPhone. Next, I jumped into the studio to get some actual product shots. The iPhone lifted up the midtones, and the Canon seems to be more detailed. The Canon also has much more of a background blur than the iPhone, but this is due to its larger sensor. The colors are pretty similar with both cameras when you look at this color board, but I can easily tell the difference in colors between the iPhone and the Canon. Mainly that the saturation is elevated with the iPhone. Next, I did a sharpness test with both cameras, and I zoomed in about 5000% to see which camera actually has more detail. And lo and behold, even though the iPhone 16 Pro has 48 megapixels, the PowerShot V1 seems to retain more detail and has more sharpness than the iPhone 16 Pro. And you can really see the difference when I go back and forth like this. Now in this macro shot, look at the difference in colors, and I only was using a little bit of light. The iPhone has more of a yellowish tone. I was very impressed with how much detail both cameras captured, but my edge goes to the PowerShot V1. Now I prefer the Canon's body over the iPhone. There's more of a grip and a lot more customization on the outside of it. The Canon PowerShot V1 starts at $899 US. The iPhone 16 Pro starts at $999 US. The iPhone has a very nice and big display. It is touch sensitive, super touch sensitive. However, I really like how the Canon has an articulating display, which is nice when you are either vlogging or you have a hard angle to shoot. The iPhone only has one port, which is a USB-C, whereas the Canon has a few. It has a headphone port, mic port, HDMI out, and a USB-C for charging and live stream and transfer. The Canon has way more customizable settings than the iPhone 16 Pro, but the 16 Pro has less settings, which might be nice for beginners who really don't know what they're doing, but the Canon's better to push you to those creative limits. Choosing between the Canon PowerShot V1 and the iPhone 16 Pro really depends on what matters most to you as a creator. The iPhone is incredibly portable and easy to use and has very strong stabilization, but the Canon PowerShot V1 offers more manual control when it comes to exposure, better skin tones, and has more of that traditional camera feel. If you value flexibility and you want that more cinematic look, the Canon might be the better fit. But if you want an on-the-go camera that can also text and call people, then go with the iPhone 16 Pro. The one that I choose is the Canon PowerShot V1 because I like that dedicated tactile experience that you get when you're using cameras, and you have a lot more creative freedom than just having your phone with you for catching memories. Let me know if I miss anything. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and I'll see you on the next video.